I would like to call the school board meeting for February 5th, 2019 for the Des Moines Public Schools to order. Please take the roll.
Mr. Barron.
Here.
Ms. Bradley.
Here.
Ms. Langford.
Here.
Ms. Ellsburn.
Here.
Ms. Delagardelle Shelley.
Here.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson.
Here.
Ms. Anderson.
Here.
First item of business is to pull from the table the agenda items tabled from January 22nd, 2019. For background, we held the January 22nd meeting by conference call due to inclement weather, so chose to table some items that did not need immediate attention. So may I have a motion and a second to pull these items from the table?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Please vote. Motion passes 7-0. Next item of business is approval of the agenda. May I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Any discussion? No. Please vote. Motion passes 7-0. Next on our agenda is approval of minutes from January 8th, 2019. May I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
Move approval.
Okay, any discussion? Please vote.
Clarification. Which meeting?
January 8th.
We were supposed to do that on the 22nd.
We tabled that on the 22nd.
Got it.
Yep. Motion passes 7-0. Next item on the agenda is approval of minutes from January 22nd, 2019. May I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes 7-0. Next, we have consent items. We allow any person.
The district recognition.
Oh, we have the district recognitions. I'm sorry, I just was moving along. Dr. Ahart, district
Thank you.
recognitions.
Good evening, board,
And I have it in.
and good evening, everyone watching at home and here live. It's always an honor to share when our teachers and staff earn statewide or national recognition. And tonight, we want to share some international recognition. Canada Snyder is a social studies teacher at Central Academy. She has also been a leader district-wide in the efforts to increase diverse learning opportunities for our students. Recently, Canada learned that she is heading off to the United Arab Emirates next month, one of 12 teachers from across the country selected by the World Affairs Council and the UAE Assembly for this year's Educators Study Tour. Canada's selection is a reflection of her work in and out of the classroom to expand our students' knowledge of the history and issues related to the Middle East. I'd like to invite Canada Snyder and our Central Academy Director, Jessica Gogarty, to come forward to share a little bit more about this recognition and the work that led up to it. Canada and Jessica.
Good evening. It is my great pleasure to have an opportunity to work with a teacher leader like Canada Snyder. She is amazing. She has a depth of knowledge. She has been part of the state of Iowa's historical writings standards, so she influences the curriculum for social studies across the state of Iowa. And next year, as a consequence of this trip, she'll be offering a course in the history of the Middle East and Islam, as well as Latin American studies. And we have a number of students who've signed up for those courses early on, and we're very excited about offering those next year because those are areas of the world that tend to go understudied in the United States. Maybe we'll do a Canadian study and sometimes Canada could create that one too. Okay, now Canada would like to tell you a little bit about what's coming up.
All right, thank you very much for this formal and special recognition. Special thank you to my letters of rec writers, Dr. Gogarty, and my colleague, Jason Danielson. This is a unique opportunity for me, but most importantly for our district, and of course, especially for our students. I have been focusing on a particular theme for the past year and a half, and that is disrupting the historical narrative. And this trip, along with new classes, as Dr. Gogarty mentioned, of Latin America history and the history of Middle East and Islam, will help further accomplish the goal of disrupting the historical narrative. You might be aware that throughout much of history, including the officially sanctioned history of the College Board, focuses on dead white men with a little women thrown in for good measure. And yet, this is not the history of our nation, and it is certainly not the history of our world. So with this trip, I will be studying the educational opportunities for women in the United Arab Emirates at the high school and at the college level. I will be meeting with United Arab Emirates teachers like myself, but also university professors, government officials, and dignitaries. I will be able to learn about the United Arab Emirates culture firsthand, but experiencing the Middle East is different than rather just teaching about it to my students. This will ensure that our students will have firsthand experience and knowledge. Additionally, I'll be presenting my findings not only to our district teachers and students, but also at the state level and then at the national level, at the National Consortium for the Social Studies Conference in Austin, Texas. This will be my third, actually, international educational study tour in my 21 years of teaching. And I thoroughly believe that opportunities like these help our students also learn how to disrupt the historical narrative. Thanks.
Thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to hearing everything after you come back. Yeah.
I have to say, I don't get this opportunity very often. And Miss Snyder was actually my U.S. history teacher. And I remember just how phenomenal of an educator that you were. And in most classes, I was super disconnected at that time, particularly in the space that I occupied, the place that you taught at that time. But I loved your class. And this is so exciting, and I'm so excited for all the things that our students are going to be able to now take from you, and congratulations.
Okay, now we'll move on to consent items. We allow any person the opportunity to speak to the board for up to 5 minutes following the presentation of an agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak to an agenda item, please go to the information desk to sign up. Remarks must be germane to the agenda, and we ask that you avoid references to personalities and character attacks, as those types of comments serve no productive purpose. We appreciate your input, and as a reminder to board and public, the board will not engage in discussion or deliberation with the speaker regarding comments made to agenda items. Discussion and deliberation will remain among board members at the board table, with speakers' comments informing said discussion, deliberation, and determinations as deemed necessary. Kirsten, do you have the motion?
I do. I move that the board approve the consent items in accordance with the recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the board secretary in the amount of $7,323,453.27.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Not, please vote. Motion passes 7-0. This right here. Get ready. Here we have some public hearings. The public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item E1, public hearing for replacing gymnasium folding door at North High School? Doug, I'm going to take, really? Okay. Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Dr. Hayart, would you please, that sounded weird, would you please introduce the matter?
Sure. I recommend the board review the proposed plans and specifications prepared by Studio Melee for replacing the folding door separating the gymnasiums at North High School, hold a public hearing, and approve the plans.
May I please have a motion and a second to approve the public hearing and superintendent's recommendation?
So moved.
No presentation, any questions? Okay, please vote. Motion passes 7-0. The public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item E2, public hearing for a student drop-off on Grand Avenue for Merrill Middle School? Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Dr. Ahart, please introduce.
I recommend the board review the proposed plans and specifications prepared by Bishop Engineering for a student drop-off lane on Grand Avenue for Merrill Middle School, hold a public hearing, and approve the plans.
May I please have a motion and a second to approve the public hearing and the superintendent's recommendation? Okay, no presentation, any questions? Please vote. Oops.
Heather, one more time.
Motion passes 7-0.
The previous one, yeah.
Next public hearing. Public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item E3, public hearing for storm drainage site improvements at Meredith Middle School? Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Dr. Hare, will you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board review the proposed plans and specifications prepared by Bishop Engineering for storm drainage site improvements at Meredith Middle School, hold a public hearing, and approve the plans.
May I please have a motion and a second to approve the public hearing and superintendent's recommendation? Okay, there is no presentation. Please, any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes 7-0. The public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item E4, public hearing for site improvements at Moulton Elementary School? Hearing no one, I will close the public hearing. Dr. Ahart, will you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board review the proposed plans and specifications prepared by Bishop Engineering for site improvements at Moulton Elementary School, hold a public hearing, and approve the plans.
May I please have a motion and a second to approve the public hearing and superintendent's recommendation?
So move.
Any questions? Please vote. Motion passes 7-0. Another public hearing. Public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item E5, public hearing for cooler freezer grease interceptor project at Morris Elementary School? Hearing no one, I will close the public hearing. Dr. Ahart, would you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board review the proposed plans and specifications prepared by Studio Melee to install a walk-in cooler freezer, storage addition, and upgrade the sanitary system to include a grease interceptor at Morris Elementary School, hold a public hearing, and approve the plans.
May I please have a motion and a second to approve the public hearing and the superintendent's recommendation?
So moved.
There's no presentation. Any discussion? Please vote. Motion passes 7-0. The public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item E6, public hearing for B8305, district-wide backup electrical generation? Right. Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Dr. Ahart, will you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board review the proposed plans and specifications prepared by IMG Corp. For district-wide electrical backup generation, hold a public hearing, and approve the plans.
May I please have a motion and a second to approve the public hearing and the superintendent's recommendation?
So move.
Second.
Questions? Please vote. Kirsten?
Oh, I pushed the button.
Motion passes 7-0. Okay. Next item on our agenda is item F1, open enrollment late application for denial. This was among items tabled from January 22nd. Superintendent Ahart, would you please introduce the item?
Yeah, per state code, we accept late applications for open enrollment out, and then we evaluate them on those hard case circumstance guidelines. I believe it's just one that was on the agenda for January 22nd, and that's the one that was denied in this last time period and that previous time period, and that's what's on your agenda, item F1.
May I please have a motion and a second to deny the open enrollment late application listed for item 1?
So move.
Any discussion? Please vote. That motion passes 7-0. Next item on our agenda is item F2, open enrollment late applications for denial. Dr. Ahart, would you please introduce the item?
Yes, the two applications on the agenda on item F2 are those that were acted on by staff from between January 22nd and present. Again, following state code, we evaluate those applications for those late applications according to those hardship guidelines. The two that were denied are on the agenda this evening.
Okay, may I have a motion and a second to deny the open enrollment late applications listed for item F2?
So moved.
Any discussion or questions? Please vote. That motion passes 7-0. Okay, the next item on our agenda is our board, item F3, Board Self-Evaluation 1.1.5. Just for background for everyone out there, the board has conducted a self-evaluation to encompass its process and performance for the last 12 months as compared to our governance process and board management delegation policies. The purpose of discussing this report is to identify any gaps in our process or performance and add to our work plan any necessary changes in process or procedure and or training to improve those identified areas. So first, I would ask for a motion and a second to accept the results of this self-evaluation as partial compliance with our board governance process policy 1.1.5.
So move.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second, and then before I open up the discussion, I just wanted to review some of the work that we did Saturday, just to kind of bring us back into that place with our next board coaches. We spent the morning talking about integrity with a specific definition, doing what I have allowed someone to expect of me to the degree I've allowed them to expect it, by when I've allowed them to expect it. They use the analogy of a wheel and its spokes, and that from an engineering perspective, we might say that the spokes give the wheel its integrity, its structural integrity. And a wheel without spokes isn't an evil wheel, it's just a wheel that won't be able to achieve the goal we intend. So no integrity, no goal. And just as spokes give a wheel its integrity, its ability to achieve the goal we intend, honoring our word is what gives our behaviors as leaders its integrity, our behavior's ability to achieve the goals we intend. Then they went on to talk about how the story we tell ourselves is that if we have an excuse for our lack of integrity, it makes it okay. So we convince ourselves that non-integrity plus an excuse equals access to goals, when the truth is our only access to goals is through integrity, doing what we've allowed someone to expect to the degree expected and by when expected. And so I mention all of this because I think it's important to relate what we're doing and the policies of the board that we've evaluated ourselves against as what we as individual board members and as a whole board have allowed each other, our staff, and our community to expect of us. And you're probably all aware of this, but I just wanted to close that wheel, that circle. So with that, I would say that there were a few items that I thought deserved some attention, but I want to open it up to the board to lift up anything that they might have found in the evaluation that need further discussion.
I appreciated the comments. There were several that resonated with me relative to sort of where we stand right now relative to next board and how we're really placing a lot of confidence in that process. But I think confidence in that process without commitment to the work is not going to get us anywhere. So I think one of the things that came up was just really sort of this notion of how committed we are to doing what we say we're going to do. And there were any number of places in the evaluation where I think that just challenged individuals. But I think that was good. And I think the timing of the evaluation, I think, really allowed us the opportunity to sort of recalibrate in a way that I think allows us to also recommit to not only the governance process, but the things that we say we're going to do. So I was encouraged. I also thought that there were some good takeaways in here. And I'm not for sure who wrote this, but there was something in here about taking the opportunity during sort of the board chair preamble to remind ourselves of what we say we're going to do. So at the beginning of the meeting, we're really sort of giving ourselves that reminder of sort of what we want to do governance-wise and how we're going to conduct ourselves. So I thought that was a good takeaway that might be able to sort of create a good tone for how we begin to execute our meetings.
Agreed.
To jump off of what Terry said, I think on Saturday during our work session, we'd taken a look at our agenda, and I think that relates to this in that I think we have some board governance policies, but I think we also have some board belief statements that fit with a lot of the work that we do, and I think a reminder for ourselves at the beginning of a meeting of trying to tie that together. I don't know if that's something we could work on, Cindy, when we're doing agenda planning, or what to kind of remind, but also to continue to bring the community in through that discussion of these are the commitments we've made and here's where we're at with our policy governance. I think is good practice for us to know our process better, but also for our community to become more aware of the process, and I think that helps to make it all transparent. I think that striving towards further integrity, using our definition on Saturday is very important. I also would like to recognize that myself and my board colleagues are humans, and I know that we all have the best of intentions for the kids in Des Moines, and I know I've always appreciated the support when I have maybe meandered a little out of where I should be, that there have always been people to remind me and support me in what I need to continue with the board work, so.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything? Deanna? Did you have anything? Oh, I thought you were raising your hand. You were counting.
I was just going to also comment on the formatting of the self-evaluation, really user-friendly.
Good.
And it still captures everything that we want to focus our attention on relative to evaluation without being so horribly detailed and cumbersome that you just get lost in
Lost in it.
completing it. Yeah.
I would, yep.
And I do look forward to staggering it throughout the year too, because there is a lot of reflection that goes into this. And so I think we'll also find that one thing that I noticed was the comments seem to be a little bit more in depth at the beginning of the survey, and kind of there are fewer comments as we get to the end. And I know that for me, I think once we are doing a few of them at a time throughout the year instead of the whole slate all at once, I think we'll probably get that same level of reflection throughout the board self-evaluation. And Sharon, did you work on format? Someone from their staff team helped. So I just wanted to say thank you, based off of what Terry said, for helping to get this formatted.
Mary Grinston.
it was
That's team. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it looks great. So thank you to her for that work.
Does anybody else have anything? Because otherwise I have a couple things that I just wanted to lift up too. And I had also noted the comment on reading our policies, and I like the idea of the board beliefs as well. And I think it could be a part of a preamble. I think it could also be shared around the table in a way that we all take turns in doing that, and not just me reading, because I think I sound sometimes like the mom on Peanuts on Charlie Brown.
Or the teacher.
Yeah, they just have, yeah. Wah, 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 wah. Okay, and so that was one thing. I think someone had commented on needs assessment. I think that's something that next board will be doing. So there, as Terry mentioned, there's a lot of this process that will be visited through that. Conflict of interest statements. Those, I believe Sharon has sent that out, so if everybody could get on that. And those actually, according to our policy, go to the superintendent and board chair. The question that I would ask, and we can talk about later, unless we want to decide it now, is if those should live somewhere on board docs as a public disclosure. I mean, they're obviously a public disclosure, but as a very transparent public disclosure.
I don't see
Okay.
why we shouldn't.
I think that there's also, as I was filling mine out today, it'd be helpful to be able to look and see what I disclosed a few years ago.
Right.
So yes, I think that that's another good reason to just put them up somewhere.
Okay, so I'm gonna note that.
I do know in 1A, when we were looking at school board member visits to schools, I don't know if it's, I don't think it's end of the world at all, but it does currently say that we coordinate visits to the superintendent, and I don't necessarily know if that's what we're doing currently. I know I've coordinated all my visits through Matt Smith, so I don't know if that's like similar role and function or not. And then somebody else made a comment, we may want to amend the 8th statement to include board members visiting school in a professional capacity, i.e. because of their function of their job. So
And what was the part about the professional capacity? Where are we at?
I'm not
Board-
sure
oh,
who-
1A.
made that comment, but
Over here. It was, so there's different reasons why, that we lay out why a board member may visit a school.
Right,
And not within that is for the function of what they're employed to do on a daily basis. And so I think that's just a clause that could be added to the list of reasons why a board member may visit a school. It's not
okay,
tremendously important, but I think it's just consistent with
I think it's a good idea.
reality.
okay.
And there was one comment that, just as we're talking about this, that says at times, someone had mentioned that at times giving less than 24-hour notice, and I thought of this on a day when my school happened to be canceled, but it was after a 2-hour delay, and then all of a sudden it was 11 a.m., and I was like, oh, it's too late, there's no way I can go. So I know that those things cannot be unforeseen, and I don't know how we account for that, so maybe that's just like a conversation I need to have with Tom offline about, like, on days that
Yeah.
that would happen, do I just give Matt Smith a buzz, like, are you in schools today? And
Or just give me a call. Yeah,
okay.
Because I would, to your point, Deanna, I would just, maybe we could change it to superintendent or designee.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that was
because
my
I think,
question
I
was,
think a
did it
while
read
back
or
it
designee?
was
Yeah.
that we should just go ahead and
Yeah,
do that through Matt.
'cause that could change over, over time, depending on our
So
work schedules and so
superintendent.
forth.
Yeah,
Or
I-
designee.
Oops, sorry. I think I mentioned that just because of sometimes our schedules or like I'll have a day
The
off.
24
and-
hours.
Yeah, and I don't realize Des Moines is in session and I'm out of session and would love to visit schools, but then feel like I can't because I didn't give the 24-hour thing, so.
That's probably, is that something we can consider, or
Phone call, I think is
a phone
great.
call?
Yeah.
So,
And then, do we have to account for that? Just in general, we have to account for that in policy, Cindy, or not?
which,
Like the contingencies of, I happen to all of a sudden have a free day and,
I mean, yeah, we can,
okay.
because probably what I'll do is ask someone to maybe draft what these changes
Could look like.
could look like.
Okay,
And I'll add that to the, as we
okay.
do the work plan on our next item. Sorry, I'm noting as we go. Yes,
I'm so sorry. I have the wrong notebook, so I didn't have my notes, but now I'm refreshed. There were a couple things.
yep.
In terms of our committee work, I thought we had a meeting where we went through and kind of
We
edited
did,
our
this was a
committee
look back 12 months, and we just did that very recently.
So it hasn't been updated in
So
our
it wasn't
policies yet.
updated for the, right. Yep.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. And then, in terms of our budget, this is something I'm thinking, I can't remember if this was my comment or it wasn't, but I agree with it. And it said under 1.11 governance budget, what could we do even better in this area to meet expectations? There's a comment that says, I think it would be helpful to review how much we have in our board budget for trainings, conferences, and our work annually, even if it is just an information-only item on our agenda or during a work session, because I feel like we have that conversation with budget constraints every year.
And that is something that I've
Was that on
asked
yours?
for. Yeah, and
Sent
I'm
it to Thomas.
waiting to receive.
Because that way, it's just helpful to know, like,
So do we want,
public
yeah, okay.
dollars.
Yeah, on an information item or just as a board, whatever?
If we see that at the beginning of every term, then we know how much we have.
Well,
Okay.
I wonder if it would fit in with our work, like if we're gonna be reviewing a work plan monthly, I don't know if it would make sense when there would be items that would require budget to then have an update on what was being spent and what. I mean, we can hash that out perhaps in policy, but we're already kind of reviewing our board work plan, and not to like belabor it to have to be every 2 weeks, but they're quarterly, like Terry said, maybe it used to be, or to somehow have a regular interval that would happen.
Right. Yeah, okay, that's noted. Thank you. One of the other things I wanted to lift up was around 3.3, superintendent accountability and performance. Currently, there were a couple of comments there, and I think, and I know I made this comment, that our monitoring process is not consistent with our policies. And that rescoring the monitoring reports is the part that's not consistent. So we need to determine if we're going to do that, then we need to put it in policy. Otherwise, we need to respond accordingly without assigning a grade. So that's kind of something that I would like to revisit with we're due to get that rubric ready really quick. So if okay, that's something I would like to revisit, if possible, with the committee and the board.
Conversation behind the scenes, but I anticipated we'd have a board conversation. Could you explain, I know we've probably revisited this, but just jog my memory. How is that out of compliance with our policy?
Let me pull the policy up. Sorry. Yeah, and I don't have the policy
I have it.
manual
I
up.
could read it.
Mhm. Oh, what did I just do? I can tell you just in general, as you're looking that up, when we accept, as we go, every monitoring report is a chunk of the evaluation already. So we've already evaluated. So when we're evaluating compliance, it either is, it's partial, or it isn't. And so then when we go back and that's the decision of the board as a whole.
Understand.
When we go back and rescore, we're putting our individual discernments back into that,
I
when really it's a decision of the board to begin with at each, and it should be the body,
And it's a little bit of a sorry.
Huh?
Bit of a disconnect too, because when we score those monitoring reports originally, it's the compliance based, but when we score on the rubric, we're putting a score to it,
based on whatever, I don't know.
subjective criteria, and then we have this conversation every year
Yep,
about how we're out of integrity. Okay.
yep, so. Sure.
Okay. And this is 3.37. The board will systematically and rigorously monitor no. Yeah, monitoring is simply to determine the degree to which board policies are being met. Information that does not address policy compliance will not be considered. The board will acquire monitoring data by one or more of these three methods: internal reporting, external reporting, direct inspection. In every case, the board will judge whether the superintendent's interpretation is reasonable and whether data demonstrate accomplishments of or compliance with the superintendent's interpretation. In every case, the standard for compliance shall be any reasonable superintendent interpretation of the board policy. The board is the final judge of reasonableness. All policies instructing the superintendent will be monitored at a frequency and by any of the three above-mentioned methods. The board may monitor any policy at any time by any of the three methods designated. And then it goes into superintendent evaluation. Is that right? Was that the section?
Yeah. I think so.
So Cindy, am I interpreting that correctly then, that the reason we may be out of compliance would be depending upon the motion that was made at a meeting regarding a certain report, that should match our comments in evaluation? Is that correct?
If I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
What it feels like from my perspective is the board is speaking as a board when they're acting on a report. And then when individual board members go back and grade it, you're taking an average that is not based on any agreed upon, or at least criteria that I don't think is mutually agreed upon and certainly is unknown to the superintendent.
Okay.
So
So we have no inter-rater reliability in our rubric when we're doing that?
I don't know that there is one.
Right.
So I'm
Right.
playing by the rules as laid out in policy, and then you guys go back and do something else to it. From what appears to be random criteria, from my perspective anyway.
My brain feels like it's running a little behind, but I think it's all coming to me now. And another piece of this conversation that I remember having every year is it goes back to what we were talking about in terms of external monitoring or not. Because what happens is we look at these monitoring reports, and there's always a couple key monitoring reports, typically around treatment of students or treatment of parents, volunteers, and owners, where we, it feels like the KPIs that we're getting maybe not necessarily be the information that we want to receive, which we talked about at our retreat extensively on Saturday, or not extensively, but we touched on it. And so then when we come and we're looking at those reports again, we've scored them as compliant, or we've marked them as compliant when we originally get those reports. But because I don't think the board's fully satisfied with the information we're getting in some of those reports to measure whether the superintendent is meeting that expectation, then we go and we score, but we're out of compliance, or we're in the wrong in the sense that we haven't outlined exactly what it is that we want to receive.
Well, and also, we've had this conversation before that we haven't done the work to change the policy to get what we want to receive.
We need to change.
And we also, yeah.
Does this also relate then to, as we're adjusting our goals, that we'll be measuring against a goal and not against ourselves? We've had that conversation before.
Yes, yeah,
And that
so
ties
that's
into this
all
policy
gonna,
as well,
yeah.
correct?
So,
Okay.
so this is all, so going forward, I believe with the work we're doing with next board, this is gonna become much easier and much more ingrained, or just, it is gonna be what it is. And so,
Help us make that more clear, right? So that
Yeah.
whatever it is that we would like to use as criteria for policy evaluation, superintendent evaluation, they can help us make sure our policy matches what we want our practice to look like. Is that correct?
I believe so, and then, and then and then it's,
Right. Because if
Dr.
our
Ahart
practice
knowing
is what
what
we
we are-
want, that's not a problem so far as it matches policy, but until it matches policy, then we're out of compliance.
right, because we've not allowed him to expect anything different than what we've.
Yes,
and
okay,
then we-
okay.
Yep.
I think the other thing that goes along with that too, the measurement piece, is we really will be able to determine whether or not progress is being made against our goal.
Right,
And we don't really have that currently.
right.
And we talked a lot about sort of those long-term measures versus the incremental measures that help us determine whether or not progress is being made, which I think also will help us to be much more clear when we are doing our scoring of monitoring reports relative to compliance. And I think that's a huge missing link right now that we've recognized for a while that hopefully we'll be able to address.
Right. So I guess I would want, and we don't have to totally talk about it right now. I feel like in the committee, we can, and we need to do it soon, is make sure that there is, and then with the board, or with the board as a whole, but probably in a work session, determine what that rubric, what that rubric will be, and yes.
Before part two of that point, the first, I think a really good example is that treatment of parents,
Employees?
owners,
Oh.
staff, treatment of staff, for instance. I think that's a really solid example of a report. And I'm bringing this up because I hear that we need an evaluation rubric, but what I'm also hearing is we have to do some work on a policy end to change some things. I mean, we can have a tool, but if we're still not getting the information that we think is important, then there's still going to be a disconnect. And I think that's an example of one report where I've heard colleagues around the board table say, this is measuring more compliance, and we're not necessarily sure if the superintendent is meeting the outcome that we want to see. I know I've been one of those
And it's on-
proponents of saying this
That's
is,
listed on our work plan with a to-be-determined date, which what I'm hoping from this conversation is that, let's do it then.
then let's get a committee together to work on that. But to your second point, I did reach out to AJ, as you asked, to see what his feedback is. I don't know if there was really enough time for us to really sit down and talk. We haven't been able to find some time to actually connect.
I think the committee needs to meet to hash that out and in short order, so that if you have things to share with, either with the committee that's assigned to this, or if you want to do it as a board whole in a work session, then let's do that
Okay.
then, because I don't think we're going to get to any end
Today at the
right
board.
now.
Understood.
That fair?
Yes.
Okay. Does anyone else have anything else at this time? And I think we'll, if there's things that we see after the fact that we think are worthy of lifting up, we can still do that. We can still do that later, so, okay? So we do, anybody else before I? Okay, we have a motion and a second, so please vote. And then the next item on our agenda, first we have F4, Board Work Plan from January 22. That was one of the items tabled, so we procedurally removed it from the table for discussion. There are some updates to that plan. I did notice as I was printing things out right before I came here that the updated version is not what's attached to the agenda, but it's essentially the same, with noted that the due dates changed for the first two things due to the weather. We had a couple things due on January 22nd, so now they moved to today. So moving on to, if you don't mind, I'm just going to move to F5 for the updated work plan. And the items due today, if you don't mind, I'm just going to run through this real quick. And then what I'm going to say is that from here on out, what I'd like to do is not be the one to run through this and to share this with other board members to lead this discussion in the future. So by the end of this, I'm hoping to have the first volunteer for the next meeting. So items due today, first two items are actually going to be finalized in our work session after the meeting, the board support position and the graduation assignments. Next item, the next board coaching schedule. What we learned on Saturday is that they'll be getting in touch with Tom for next steps, so there's really nothing for us to do until Tom gets that information and can share it accordingly. Next four items that go together, the 360 evaluation information. I have some options that are ready for committee review when we meet. The Fox Lawson study, I know that's been received and is ready for review, committee review. The rubric we just talked about and the evaluation timeline. Okay, so you have something for committee review and then Tom's review, excuse me.
Madam Chair. The process of that, is that a full board looks at that with our superintendent, or is that the committee that's reviewing that timeline and then bringing it back to the board for a vote?
I think it's committee, make sure Tom can meet the recommended timeline. We're trying to work backwards from your contract date. April 2 is by which we're supposed to have the evaluation and work backwards from there. But so again, something that needs to be done in short order so we can stay on track toward that. We have a reading list on there. We almost all have the 4DX book. That was, I believe that was a due today thing. I printed this all out, sorry. 4 disciplines of execution. We also, most of us have received, and I have for Dwana and Rob, what school boards can do. And I think we're short the two 40X books for you two as well, which we'll get those. So what I would suggest there is that maybe Kirsten and I and Matt and Tom as the board development committee could discuss a sequence and a strategy for maybe working through that 40X book, if that's all right with everyone, kind of because that book relates to a lot of the work we're doing with Next Board in the process and goal setting.
Cindy, so as we're working through the reading list, we'll also be having discussions. I think it might be good for us to maybe judge at this time the willingness of the board to do those as part of work sessions concurrent after meetings or at another time. My preference would be that we're all gathered here anyway and to try to stagger those opposite of longer work sessions to allow us time, since we already have Tuesday evenings reserved. I don't know about you guys, but I don't try to schedule things after board meetings because we never know what's going to happen. So just to try to gauge as we're working through that tomorrow with Tom and Matt, that we know what your preference would be when we start to look at a timeline.
So to do it
After, is after board meetings good, or do you prefer something else? I'm so sorry, I missed. So if we're gonna be having board discussions about the reading that we'll do, would you like to do those during work sessions following board meetings or at another time?
After board
After
meeting.
board meetings? Okay, that was what I thought the preference was, but I didn't want to schedule that and then have everyone go, oh no, I don't want to stay late after a meeting for that. I'd rather do it another night. So I just wanted to make sure.
And then what I would suggest is that probably start reading that 40X book as soon as, for those who have it, and as soon as you get it, and with anticipation of maybe by the March 5th meeting, we'd be able to, maybe, but just know that we're.
And
going to
these are
break.
our personal copies and we can mark in them?
Mhm.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Okay, so we're good on that. I see, oh, Matt has a couple, good. And then just to point out some items upcoming that we have on the radar, Equity Policy 219. City Council School Board Joint Meeting, we have reserved March 24th for that meeting. Terry, Tom, and I will be meeting with Mayor County, Coleman, Scott Sanders on February 27th, again for more planning.
Sorry, that meeting on the 24th, is that approximated for the evening?
27th of March,
Oh, 27th, okay.
I believe, 5:30
Okay, I just wanted to confirm, thank you.
was the plan. One of the other items on there, on the work plan, is the listening sessions, and that was to an ad hoc committee, Rob, Deanna, and Kirsten. And we know we've just had the listening sessions through Next Board, so they're gonna be compiling that information and getting it back to us. So we just wanna wait and see what applies from what we hear back from them to what, and then go from there.
Just, so is the idea for waiting on the results of the community meetings that just happened to figure out if there are issues that we want to have specific listening sessions on, or if there's information that we didn't get that we want to get, or is it about who we heard from?
So it's more about what I have in the notes there is that a while back, we had been talking about having listening sessions around the behavior and various things that we've heard about in and around our schools. And so at one point, I believe there was thoughts about having various stakeholder groups and listening to them to, I believe, inform our treatment of students, perhaps. And I don't know what else it would maybe inform, but I guess I didn't know if we wanted to wait to see if any of that, even though we were talking about, even though our consultants were focused on outcomes for students. I know in some of the listening sessions when they talked about impact and also some of the social, emotional, and psychological impacts that I heard some of the community members talking about, I wondered if some of those things that they've collected would inform that. I don't know what anybody else thinks or how you want to proceed, so.
Part of our work session on Saturday too, we had discussed perhaps other ways that we could get a better feedback loop that wasn't just public forum where we wouldn't have an opportunity to interact, but maybe to find some other venues or ways to do that. So I don't know if that's something that Rob, Deanna, and I would want to have a discussion about or to brainstorm, because I was unclear with that was something that it seemed like board members present were interested in, but I don't know if we had a lot of guidance on if there were strategies other districts could use and we could consult with next board on that, or if we were going to have to brainstorm these ourselves.
I think there's some things that they'll definitely facilitate or instruct us on how to facilitate some of that two-way communication, those processes moving forward, but I'm not sure how for the specificity.
Okay.
Yeah,
So is that something we want to just wait on, Deanna?
That when we originally talked about these sessions, it was before we really got heavy into the next board stuff and determined that they were also going to do community listening sessions. So I agreed that there may be pieces of what they heard that feed into this. I don't think, though, that it precludes us continuing to pursue those conversations, especially given some of the feedback that I received. And also, just as an aside, people coming to the session thinking it was one thing when maybe it was something else. And so I think the opportunity to still have that engagement with our stakeholders, teachers, students, et cetera, around particular subject matters, areas, I think is still pertinent, because I'm not for sure there was a breakthrough moment for some people based on the design of the sessions that we had with Next Board.
I would add, after my meeting at the Dean Operations Center, I don't know how many of the sessions that you all attended had students present, but I would say I remember when we were having these conversations about doing some of this focus group work, it was specifically looking to get the input and feedback and voices of students about what's going on in their schools. And there were 2 students from Éxito that were present at our meeting, and their feedback really gave me pause to think about a few different issues. And if we're asking the community what we think our students should be able to know and do when they graduate, I think the student voice is really critical, and I'm not sure the one meeting that we have set up with students from the equity group that we have is sufficient. I think it's a great start. I'm excited that they're a part of it. So I talked with Lori and asked, were there opportunities potentially to do this with more students? And she said, absolutely. We have a few weeks until, we're compiling all of those final results. She said we'd be more than willing to come back and, do Zooms. She also put the work back on us and said, it's not rocket science to facilitate these. So if any board members want to go and facilitate these conversations with groups of students, you're more than welcome to. I don't know how we move forward, but I definitely think we need more students' voices incorporated in this work.
okay, so I guess what I'm going to ask then is either we all are going to need to sit down and figure this out, or if the subcommittee could actually come back to the board with a plan of action on what this would look like, how we're going to do it, to recommend to the board so that we can move forward. Because otherwise, we're going to sit up here and keep having these same discussions.
Can I ask? Oh, go ahead.
And I just want to say, I thought it was a great start, great meetings, great feedback, and nothing critical about it at all. And it was a lot of work. But I agree, I think maybe not everyone was in the room. Everyone's not ever, they're not all going to be in the room ever, but we could do a little bit of a better job of reaching more students and community members. And yeah, so I think we do it quickly, committee or whatever, but
Right, so however, so it can, I guess, is that committee willing to do that?
My question is, what's board member capacity outside of the members of that committee? Like, how many people would have time and/or space in their schedules to facilitate a 30-minute conversation with students?
Are we talking about deadline within next 30 days? Like we would come back with a plan of action in 2 weeks and then within the next 2 weeks be holding sessions?
I think it would have to move that quickly. She said we have about a month, 3 weeks to a month if we wanted to hold some more sessions with students.
Okay, I know that I personally would not have that capacity in the
That's
month of
fair.
February.
Yep,
So
that's why
to
I'm
be in
asking.
my integrity, I can't commit to that.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking. I'm like, we may not have the capacity around the table to do it. So I heard Dewana.
Yeah, I know I would be able to do that since my days are open and free, so I would do as many that needed to be done. However, we wanted to move forward with that.
I think I could too, especially since I was out of town for all these last ones, so.
So we have two, and I could probably work it within my job duty. You sure do. Okay.
I'm also gonna ask, and maybe, I don't wanna put work on staff, but one of the suggestions had also been potentially surveys related to this work. And so I know that once we compile this and we kind of start to get our goals, we're gonna go back out and listen, but I also didn't know if we could solicit public comment via website of like, I don't know if next board could put together like a 90-second video of this is what a student outcome is, this is what your school board wants, and then, you know, they could type out their 3 ideas just like we did at the public. I don't know if that would be helpful or not.
I think that's
but-
a good idea, and I think that they were willing to give us their PowerPoint that we could put up for some amount of time. It can't be forever.
Right.
With some sort of, I mean, at some point, we're gonna have to keep moving, but,
Right.
but yeah, with some sort of feedback loop, and perhaps that's something that we can talk about tomorrow and how we can make that happen.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. So, committee, are you going to put together a plan of action?
I'm working on it right now since I put forth that
Okay.
idea.
And so that's probably, honestly, if we're talking about, we need to know probably as a board about it before our next meeting, if it possibly. So if some sort of update could be, okay.
Yep.
I'll put next meeting, but knowing that we know an action plan needs to come before that.
And maybe, I'm sorry, I don't want to circle back too far, but Deanna and Duana, we are going to talk about when we will meet to discuss our policy further before we leave tonight? Okay, thank you.
Okay. And then I'll add the other items from our, as far as adding those, well, we should date those policies. Treatment of employees is on there with no date. And who wants to? I'm happy to help work on that.
I'd be happy to help on that too, and I also think some of that ties back to the external monitoring that we talked about as well, so maybe trying to figure out a way that we maybe connect the dots on some of those.
Yep, and that's also on there without?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm putting Terry and I on external monitoring and treatment of employees. Anybody else to join us? One more.
What's our timeline on that? Because that will just determine my capacity. Are we thinking by the end of, like, most of the work will take place before the end of March,
That sounds,
middle of April? How far out are we thinking?
first meeting in April. Sounds great.
I will. February, all of March. After about 3 weeks, I will have much more capacity.
Okay.
So Heather, if you want to, or I can.
And then let's treatment of parents, owners, volunteers, is that something? The only thing I had on that one was removing volunteers and finding another place for that. We had talked about that, I guess.
Oh, creating a separate policy?
Yeah, so
Okay.
I don't know if that's, let's just do these two unless somebody wants to take that on at the moment. Anybody else? Anything else? Did we cover it? Thank you, everybody, for bearing with us as we go through that, but it is important that we take account of all this and make sure that we're all on the same page as far as what it is we're planning and who's.
Cindy?
Yes.
I don't want to give us any more work immediately.
Yes.
But the process map for the vacancy appointment, we're probably going to want to talk about that before we get too far away from that process.
You're right.
So I don't know, if we want to put that, we only have one meeting in March, but I don't know if we want to act upon that in March or April, but we'll want to start working on that. And maybe we can talk about that tomorrow at agenda planning of
Okay.
a suggested timeline, but I just wanted to
Yeah.
ping that we might want to put
Yep.
that above like the community workshop for the 2019 election and some of the other things, so.
Yep. And there are a couple things that I'll add from the, what we just talked about on 1.8 for the function of employment as far as visits to school, superintendent and designee. And those are probably going to be fairly quick changes. So I'm happy to just take that and do it and to show you all and get, unless anybody wants to fight me for it, the 1.8, okay.
I could be a second set.
Okay. And then Kirsten and I could probably figure out how to deal with, did we say that? We're gonna figure out how to,
yeah,
the
let's do-
policies and beliefs. And then the 1.11 budget, adding it, adding something about it being quarterly or figuring that out. Let's us
Yeah.
look at that, all right?
And you and I could probably also look at the process map vacancy appointment and put that on a future work session potentially.
Yep. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Should use Qualtrics. Yeah, I'll get it to you.
Okay.
That way you at least have something to.
Yeah, yeah. I appreciate
you.
it.
Anything else? Thanks, everybody. Okay. Next on the agenda were informational items. Both of these, let's see, I gotta get it right. Both of the informational items under G were holdovers from the 22nd. We put them back on again just as a procedural point since we did table everything except for the items that we handled on the 22nd. So you can review those if you haven't already. And then finally, items of privilege. And before I ask other board members for items to share, I just want to express again gratitude to the staff members who spent a whole day with us on Saturday. Matt, Tim, Noel, Shelley, Susie, Thomas, Sheila, and Cassandra. And I don't think I missed, I think that I caught everybody. It was a great day of collaboration and the start of what will be some very transformational work, I believe. And also want to thank the staff members who spent their time at our community listening sessions, both on Sunday and Monday. That too was important as we do our job as a board to reflect the visions and values that are priorities to our community and translate those into our student expectation goals. And thanks also to the community members who spent time with us to tell us what they think that students should know and be able to do. And I did note this, that I did believe that there was going to be some opportunity for people to submit input within the next week or so. And just to remember that we will be engaging the community again within the next few months as we go through the process and have worked through those goals. And then it's, again, the beginning of establishing a process of two-way communication with our public. Okay, now other board members.
I do. See, so Saturday is our second coffee with legislators. It is Saturday, February 9th, 9 o'clock at North High School. And invite the public, students, parents, grandparents, community members and leaders to join us as we learn a little bit more about school budget and give time to interact with our legislators about educational issues.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Did I mention it was at North, in the cafeteria? Okay, at 9, okay.
I just wanted to reiterate Cindy's thank you. For me, Saturday was what I needed to refocus on our work and to think about what this work means to me. And I think particularly after, seeing Natasha step down and seeing how difficult this work can be and the weight of the responsibility, it was incredibly cheering for me to see the collaboration that we did shoulder to shoulder with staff. And I'm very excited to move forward in that and to continue to focus more on student outcomes and the things that are the most important for the kids in Des Moines. So thank you, colleagues and staff, for doing that on Saturday.
Anyone else? Okay, turn it over to the superintendent.
Yeah, I want to echo my thanks to my team that was there all day on Saturday. And I also want to recognize some of you are better able to appreciate this than others. But I know where we were as a board about 8 years ago and how much progress has been made really steadily, despite when I look around the room, there's 2 of you who were on the board when I became superintendent. I've worked with 14 different board members so far, and due to the leadership on this board, consistent progress has been made. And I know, I'm hearing the weight of you talk about your work plan right now, and I get sometimes a little nervous that you're going to put too much weight on your shoulders. But I do want to recognize that it's absolutely the right work. There are maybe not any boards in Iowa who have this focus. So, keep that in perspective. It is very hard work. And you're doing hard work for 33,000 students that very, very, very much need outstanding leadership from their board. So while I do appreciate that it is stress-provoking and it's a lot, you need to recognize that you're stepping above what your colleagues are doing around the state, and that's not unnoticed by your superintendent, and is very much appreciated. So thank you for being the leaders that your community needs you to be. Just one quick note, legislatively, and I probably say this every year, but boy, the bills are being introduced at a very fast and furious pace, at least as it relates to educational issues. And there have been some crazy ones introduced this year that, hopefully we'll give enough attention to, that they get killed before they get out of committee and become real potentially problematic. But a couple of things that have come out in the last week really help illustrate, and I'm not going to go into the detail, but really help illustrate where a district like Des Moines that is property poor can kind of get a double whammy when it comes to certain machinations of the budget process. The hole that we feel like we're trying to stay out of can get deeper really quickly if for no other reason out of ignorance, some actions are taken at the legislative level that may not be intended to cause harm, but can create an unfair burden for property poor districts like Des Moines. So we're paying very close attention to that and investing a lot of time and energy, making sure that we're on top of those things and investing personal contacts as needed to make sure that we steer those in the right direction. And thanks to the board, especially Cindy most recently, who's really been spending a lot of time on very important issues for our kids. That's all I got.
Okay, with that, I will, adjourn the meeting, and we'll hold a work session in about 10 minutes.